This broadcast has done extensive reporting on the effects of climate change. They said it was impossible. Who in their right mind would drop thousands of water-loving beavers into one of the driest regions in America? And yet that's exactly what a team of ecologists did. Nowadays, Yellowstone is famous for its rich nature, stunning landscapes, and of course, the lush green waterways that run through it. But it wasn't always like that. Back in the 1940s, the small streams of Yellowstone weren't exactly bursting with life. They were dried up, eroded floodplains with barely any plants and almost zero biodiversity. Then, between 1986 and 1999, over 100 beavers were dropped into Yellowstone Park. And over time, the place started looking the way it does now. So, did nature's little engineers save the park from certain doom? Yep, but the story also involves wolves, elk, and even willows. In other words, the situation is confusing. So, let's start unraveling how the crown jewel of the U.S. got its makeover. So, let's start with the wolves. Even though the main stars of this story are actually the beavers once, their numbers in Yellowstone were totally normal for the area. And then along came people. For some reason, people have always thought of wolves as dangerous predators that could attack you or snatch some livestock. These days, we've got studies showing that wolves almost never go after people, and they target farm animals so rarely, it's almost not worth mentioning, something like 2 to 3%. But back then, nobody knew that. So folks decided to get rid of them. The well-known wildlife biologist Adolph Murray analyzed the reports of Yellowstone Park rangers from 1915 to 1935. And now we've got his data. Every year from 1915 to 1923, more than 4 wolves were regularly killed in the park. In some years, the number of victims of human fear even reached double digits. As a result, from 1924 to 1935, not a single wolf was killed, meaning that these animals were no longer present in the park. And as is usually the case, the extermination of a species in a specific area couldn't help but lead to bad consequences. Now let's talk a bit about elk. Naturally, they're prey for wolves. Sure, they can fight back against this predator, but wolves hunt in packs, and together they're a force to be reckoned with. So they manage to take down even such big game. Besides, elk are hunted by bears, cougars, and other predators that lived and still live in Yellowstone Park. But it was the wolves that kept their numbers in check. So after they disappeared in the 1920s, the elk population grew, and more importantly, their eating habits changed. Because of the wolves, elk roam over large areas. Instead of munching on plants in one small spot, they have to keep moving to avoid getting eaten. Plus, there's no harm to the ecosystem because the plants don't get much damage. But when the gray wolves disappeared in Yellowstone, the elk realized their biggest threat was gone. So why bother wandering all over the park nibbling here and there when they could just stand in one spot and eat everything in sight? Eventually, scientists found that the elk got so lazy they devoured all the vegetation, which couldn't recover fast enough. What do beavers have to do with it? Well, the thing is, elk were going wild on willows, a super important tree for those toothy engineers. For beavers, willows are food, shelter, pretty essential stuff. Back in 1921, when wolves were still around in Yellowstone and willows weren't getting hammered, researchers found 25 beaver colonies. Jump to 1953. Wolves are gone. Elk are everywhere, and they're decimating the willows. The number of beaver colonies had dwindled to just 8. Could they have come from somewhere else? No, because the beaver population dropped dramatically after the arrival of the colonists. According to various scientists and researchers, the number of beavers across North America fell from 60 million to just 10 million. Some sources claim that the population even dwindled to 100,000 individuals. Yes, they weren't completely wiped out, but the small number of beavers couldn't naturally restore the Yellowstone population, and the conditions were absolutely unsuitable, mainly because of the elk and their zeal to exterminate the willows. In 1995, 14 gray wolves were brought into the park from Canada, getting the elk on the move again. The next year, another 17 wolves were brought in. In no time, the elk started behaving just like they did before the predators were wiped out, and the willows began to recover. Still, due to all the human activity in the park, by the time the wolves were introduced, some of Yellowstone's key biodiversity hotspots, streams, and other small waterways had already suffered significant damage. The banks had been eroded for quite a while. The shoreline vegetation was either dead or dry and had lost much of its diversity. As a result, due to habitat changes, a lot of insects and other creatures that relied on those small waterways as a temporary or permanent home disappeared. In today's video, we've got a lot of animals featured, and now it's the fish's turn. Human impact on the local ecosystem has caused water temperatures to rise too much to support salmon. The number of bird species living around the waterways has also dropped significantly and couldn't bounce back just because of the wolves. Scientists thought it over for a while and finally came to a conclusion. Besides wolves, Yellowstone also needs some willow lovers and natural engineers known as beavers. Then, marching in a tight formation, the beavers entered Yellowstone National Park. Well, visually, it wasn't quite that nice. According to one of the biologists, help for Yellowstone's ecosystems came gradually. Between 1986 and 1999, the park received beavers every year from the Gallatin National Forest up north of Yellowstone. All in all, scientists introduced 129 beavers meant to rescue the local creeks from complete decay. As the National Park Service website says, back in 1996, when the planting wasn't even finished yet, the number of found colonies with varying amounts of rodents had already hit 49. In other words, the beavers liked what had been going on for about a year in Yellowstone. The condition of the willow thickets was improving thanks to wolves keeping the local elk population in check. The next study in 2007 showed that the number of colonies had more than doubled to 127. By then, it was clear as day Yellowstone was turning back into a haven for nature's engineers. Yes, researchers needed to keep at least a rough count. However, you could tell that beavers liked Yellowstone just by looking at the state of the waterways. They started going back to how they looked before humans wiped out the animals. If someone ever asks you how to describe the impact beavers have on water ecosystems, you can confidently say drastic. And if they ask why, the answer is simple. Dams. When beavers build their well-known structure, it blocks the flow of the waterway. This causes ponds to form, that is, water reservoirs. It's exactly the same thing that happens when a river is blocked by human dams. Then the ponds turn into wetlands, which in turn are a kind of communal living space, housing a whole bunch of different animal species. So according to research, even though they don't take up that much of a landscape, these kinds of coastal habitats support 70 to 80% of species at some point in their life cycle. Can you imagine the scale of what beavers do with just one dam? They create a whole new habitat. No wonder many agree that these rodents are some of the top architects of wildlife. When the number of beavers in Yellowstone dropped to a pretty insignificant minimum, dams were still around. But their number was small. Since 1986, when they started reintroducing the rodents, and then from 1995, when they got willows they need to live properly, the number of dams began to grow. So along with that, wetlands in Yellowstone started to come back, and they're known for having really rich biodiversity. Plus, the areas near creeks and other waterways generally became greener overall. But that's not all. Since the stream flows fast, it hardly affects the groundwater supply. In the case when water just sits still, like in beaver ponds, it slowly seeps into the ground, meaning it replenishes the groundwater. As a result, there are reserves for droughts that nature itself and humans can tap into. And willows can use those reserves too. Yep, thanks to their roots. These trees are perfectly adapted to grow where beavers thrive, that is, near waterways. Besides that, it's said that every reservoir made by the natural engineer leads to the creation of muddy shoals, perfect spots for willows to thrive. So it turns out that back in the last century when wolves were wiped out and there was no proper control over elk, plus the beaver population was struggling, the willow thickets took a double hit, which caused problems with their growth. Then when the elk started eating the plants less aggressively plus the beavers set everything up, the willow thickets became thick and lush. There's even a 2018 study that shows what happened after beavers appeared in the national park. Researchers analyzed the situation along Blacktail Deer Creek located in the northern part of Yellowstone National Park and came to the following conclusion. If in 1995 the vegetation near the streams was almost non-existent, then it gradually increased, reaching coverage of up to 43% and 93% along the western and eastern branches of the creek, respectively by 2018. As for the willow, Its numbers in 2017 had grown significantly compared to before the return of wolves and beavers. On top of that, it was found that in 2017, the plant height ranged from 20 to 78 in, meaning the plants got taller. But the park researchers don't stop at just assessing the beaver's impact on the trees. So, one of the biologists points out that the pond is not just the reason why wetlands form, but also a great spot for fish like salmon. Yeah, you can recall what we already talked about. At some point, most of Yellowstone's waterways stopped being interesting for salmon, which decided to pick other places for spawning. Beaver ponds are the perfect option for salmon to swim there from the salty ocean waters to procreate. The water there is cool, which this fish species absolutely loves. Even more, if the water wasn't right, salmon simply wouldn't come to Yellowstone's beaver ponds at all. Besides that, a pond's a spot protected from the sun thanks to the plants growing on its shores. Like, for example, that very willow hanging its branches down, giving young salmon shelter from the rays. Apart from salmon, the ponds and wetlands made by beavers are home to otters, minks, marsh birds, waterfowl, and insects. Can't forget them. Ponds and wetlands are the perfect place for mosquitoes to lay their larvae. So, you get the idea. Beavers are like a catalyst, turning streams into something like a dormitory where many animal species live side by side, a hot spot of biodiversity, just like we said. It seems beavers deserve a medal for helping nature and Yellowstone's waterways. You could say it's thanks to them that local streams and little creeks have come alive. But that's not all, because beavers need to make room on their bodies for yet another medal for protection from catastrophic natural disasters. Sounds weird. We'll explain everything now. Fires in Yellowstone are pretty common. Most of the time they start quickly because of a random lightning strike. According to the National Park Service website, since 1972, there have been an average of 24 fires a year, burning more than 4,940 acres of Yellowstone. Sometimes, though, the fires get a lot bigger and more damaging. A prime example is the fires of 1988, which became the biggest wildfire incident in the recorded history of Yellowstone National Park. That year, 1,235 square miles went up in flames, which was 36% of the park's total area. What do beavers have to do with it? Well, under normal conditions, water doesn't burn, meaning that wetlands, ponds, and any other beaver-made water reservoirs act like a wall, an impenetrable shield against fire that can at least save some parts of the forest and other natural areas of the park. And here's the proof. These are photos from Idaho where a fire broke out near the Bear Creek. At one point, as you can see, everything around is burnt, but the waterway and the plants surrounding it are practically untouched because the fire simply couldn't do anything to the water zone that formed due to the beavers' work. And yeah, if you think life's just great for the beavers in Yellowstone, think again. One day in June 2022, the northern parts of Yellowstone got hit with 7 to 9 inches of rain in just 24 hours. Plus, the snow melted too. Reportedly, it all led to the worst flooding in the area in the past 500 years. The powerful surge wiped out dams. Some beavers might have been hurt or even died. Yeah, not exactly the best of times for the beavers back then. Also, human activity had a major impact on beavers' ability to increase their population. Well, more precisely, actions taken in the last century that set off this whole chain reaction, causing beavers to lose willows and then disappear. Decades with very few beavers changed the geomorphology of streams. For this reason, when scientists observed a few areas that beavers were starting to reoccupy, they noticed that the animals were facing serious challenges. One of the biologists says he was observing a colony that was moving from place to place. Yes, they have willows in decent conditions to settle down, but they still can't seem to find the right spot to build a pond. This particular story ended with a colony eventually blocking one of the streams with a dam and creating a pond in 2021. But it's possible that other colonies might have had a different outcome and never found a suitable place after all their searching. Despite all the challenges, you could say that thanks to wolves and beavers, they still managed to restore many of Yellowstone's waterways to their former state. Who played a bigger role in the recovery? The sharp-toothed predators like wolves or the equally toothy builders like beavers? Both species equally? In this case, you can't single out one over the other because the positive outcome wouldn't have happened without either one of them. All in all, there's a positive outcome. Wow, it sure takes a lot of effort and time. The beavers have to like the spot. Then they need to build their dams. And only after that, over time, the ecosystem will be established. Yeah, that's how it is. But there's a cheat code. Nobody says you can't do the beavers' work without the natural engineers themselves and build artificial dams. No concrete used here. People aren't trying to create anything like those massive well-known dams that bring tons of benefits, but also do a lot of harm to nature. In this case, it's all natural materials, branches, sticks, rocks, and everything else. The most common practice is that they don't even prep the materials in advance and bring them to the site. Almost all of it's taken straight from the surrounding landscape, literally copying the beavers' building techniques. But the construction process is still different. Wooden posts are hammered into the stream bed, and then thin branches from nearby willows are woven in. That's how a permeable barrier is made. Then people borrow a trick from beavers. They pack the structure with mud, sand, soil, roots, and plants. All this makes the construction more complex, creating a really close beaver-like analog. Of course, other combos and approaches can be used. It's basically whatever anyone's good at. The main thing is to do it like the beavers do. And yeah, it works. Ponds form, groundwater levels rise, biodiversity increases, and all the stuff we've already talked about happens.